Hello, everybody. Welcome in. Welcome in. If you're wondering, did Sean get a haircut? He did not. I'm Tristan Mohabir, filling in for Sean Gibbons today. Thank you for being with us. So, as we always do, let's start with our two-word check-in. Let us know where you're tuning in from, and in two words, how you're doing in the chat. So while you all do that, I'm going to run through a few quick slides here before I hand it over. We have a wonderful session today planned with Vanessa Schnaidt from Cause Communications. Just a little bit of housekeeping to get out of the way up front. Hopefully you all know this by now. If you're a network member, you can join us in Slack. There are thousands of folks in there every day chatting, getting support, asking questions. We have a new fun channel where you can share pet pictures, whatever you've been listening to. There's it's a lot of good activity in there 24/7 at your fingertips, and that's for network members. Circles are your network within the network, so you can connect with folks based on your issues, identities, and job functions. We actually today just announced two new circles. So we have our design communication circle, I think, and digital communications professionals. So circles exclusively for network members. And yeah, next slide, Kareem. Com Network Local, we have, I think, over a dozen groups now around the country gathering usually once every month, couple of months. They're folks in your backyard, free to everybody. So you do not have to be a network member to join and participate in local. So sometimes they're virtual events, sometimes they're in person, but I think our next slide tells us where we have our next few events. So if you are in Denver, Chicago, North Carolina, definitely join those folks. We got a few happy hours planned, some with some dedicated programming. It's always a good time. So check out your local groups and get involved. This is a new offering from us. So earlier this month, if you're a network member, we debuted our new portal and directory. What it is a way for you to find and connect with folks more easily than ever in the network. You can filter by job title, organization, location, area of expertise, area of interest, but it's only as good as the information we have in there. So we have filled out your basic information if you're a network member, but we're going to rely on you all to go in there and fill out your profiles. You can add profile pictures, social media handles, LinkedIn, all that good stuff. You can also take care of your own memberships in there. So if you have an institutional membership, you can add and remove folks, you can renew, all of that. If you're a network member, again, look to your inbox. We sent an email earlier this month. If you don't have that information, you can get in touch with us, and my colleague Amy Lubert will be happy to help you get set up. Next slide, please, Kareem. Okay. ComNet 25. So this year we're going to be in Denver in October. We're going to have a lot of excellent programming as we always do. As the summer approaches and we go into spring, we'll start announcing what we have planned. But make sure you sign up early. Our early bird rate is now over, but we still have some open seats. So make sure you get in before they're gone. And right before I hand it over to Vanessa, I just want to thank Kelly, who is our ASL interpreter today. Thank you very much, Kelly. My colleague Kareem Alston behind the scenes running our slides, and my colleague Carrie Klein, who will be helping drop some links in the chat. And with that, we're in for an excellent session today. Vanessa was actually with us a couple years ago to talk about evaluation. We're going to build off of that session and go a little bit deeper today. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Vanessa.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tristan. All right, let me go ahead and get my screen share going here. All right. Okay, awesome. Well, it's such a pleasure to be with you all on this fine Wednesday. And thanks to everyone for dropping your two words into the chat. I see that some folks are feeling cozy, which I love to see, especially on for folks who are coming to us from more chilly locations. Other folks have mentioned, you know what? I'm here, which is a victory in and of itself. So thank you, everyone, for that. I'm so excited to be here with you to talk about measuring communication success. I don't know about you, but my January felt like it lasted 6,042 days. And there's now a to-do list for February that's probably even longer than that, or at least feels like it. So I wanted to, off the bat, just say thank you for taking the time to be here today and to learn together. Again, a big thank you to Kelly for providing ASL services today. It's wonderful to have you with us. As Tristan mentioned, my name is Vanessa Schnaidt, and I'm part of the team at Cause Communications, which is a capacity building organization anchored in communications. I've been a member of the Communications Network for more than 15 years. And one of the things that I love about this community is that it's a place where we can not only learn about and support each other in understanding how the field of social impact communications is changing, this is also a place where we, as strategists and practitioners, get to help shape the evolution of this work. So I come to you today as a lifelong learner and a partner in our shared quest to crack the nut of this often elusive topic of measuring the impact of your communications. So here's what I'd like to offer to you today by way of goals for this session. The first is to provide a strategic framework that you can use to ground your practice, regardless of whether you're here today representing a foundation, a nonprofit, or any other type of purpose-driven organization. Second, we're going to discuss some broader shifts um, in the social impact field and how those open up some really exciting possibilities around evaluation. So the goal here is to help you push your thinking around what success in communications even looks like or could look like. As we're setting the stage and going over the goals for the webinar, I want to be really clear about what this webinar is and what it isn't. Our discussion today is going to primarily live at the strategy level so that it can be as flexible as possible in meeting your needs. And we're going to be more focused on what I would call a mindset shift and introducing some new ideas rather than lay out a one-size-fits-all formulaic approach that you should be doing. So this is not going to be a prescription for what software tools and monitoring services you need to be using. This is an invitation to get curious. Well, I mean, spoiler alert, there is no one right way to do this. Evaluation is not paint by numbers. Um, you also know your organization best. You know what your capacity looks like, and ultimately you get to take these ideas and then define what approaches and specific metrics are going to be most meaningful, relevant, and realistic for you to gather and use. That said, I know that food for thought does not get that board report over the finish line. So I'm going to be including practical tips, concrete examples, and lots of tools and resources so you can feel equipped to put these ideas into action. That is my commitment to you. All right, so here is what you can expect for the next 45 minutes or so. We'll be spending a few minutes talking about why even measure communications in the first place, focusing on 3 key benefits of evaluating your communications activities. Next, we'll dig into the building blocks of where to start, and I'll introduce 4 principles that you can use to set yourself up for success. And that's so before we get into talking about those new concepts, we'll make sure there's a really solid strategic foundation that we can use to anchor this work. Then we'll lift up some observations about how the field of social impact work is changing more broadly, what that means in terms of what impact and success look like, and then how can we apply that to our evaluation practice. What are the implications and opportunities, and what can we learn from some other organizations already trying this out? We'll wrap up with a couple more examples that help show what this could look like in your organization. And I see that there are some folks who have commented on low audio. I've got my audio all the way to the max, and there are some volume controls that you can each use to help increase that as well. But I'll be sure to speak up throughout as well. Thanks for letting us know. Before we jump into this first section on why measure, two more quick notes. One is a reminder and an invitation on how we can all show up in this space today. As Sean and the network team often say, you don't have to go it alone, which is great because we're more effective when we work together. So I want to acknowledge and honor the wisdom here in this virtual room today. This is a community of experts and practitioners. And so in that spirit of going farther together, as questions arise in the chat, I encourage you to chime in if you have an answer or a related resource to share. I'm curious to see what I can learn and what you all have to share here as well. So let's approach this topic from a stance of abundance and wisdom and generosity, especially against a backdrop of climate disasters, executive orders, and just general chaos. Let this communications network community be a counterpoint to that, both here on this webinar and as we continue these conversations afterwards on Slack, in circles, and in our local groups. The last note is an acknowledgement that we're all coming at this topic from different places. So I want to set a baseline for some shared language for today. Monitoring is ongoing data collection. You'll hear me use that term throughout the conversation today. Evaluation is what you do with all the data that you get from your monitoring. It's the assessment that you make based on your data. And so both are key parts of determining if your communications efforts are successful. Okay, let's start with some fundamental principles and assumptions. First up, monitoring and evaluating your communications is valuable. It's worth doing. To this, I say a resounding yes. But why? What makes it valuable? What makes this worth carving out time for, especially when we're already dealing with competing priorities on a daily basis? Let's zero in on two main purposes of evaluating your communications, and then one bonus benefit that is really aligned with this generous thinking mindset that I mentioned a minute ago. The first is to tell the story of your impact. For our external audiences, this means the impact of our organization or the impact that a particular campaign is having. For me, this benefit actually became exciting when I realized that the story that we were telling could help us stand out from the crowd. It could showcase how our organization fits into the issue area landscape and the unique and the important role that we were playing within it, and help secure funding for the next year of the campaign by spotlighting that impact. It could deepen the trust and collaboration among our partners because these were stories and outcomes that they could take pride in too. And by highlighting the work and the impact of projects that bring our mission to life, we were naturally attracting more people who shared our vision and our values. Now, for our internal audiences, this was an opportunity to make the case for communications. Reports and data become tools for transparency and education, tools to shine a light on this field of communications that can sometimes be enigmatic to folks who are not doing this work day in and day out. Additionally, showing the value of the investment in communications can strengthen your case to secure more staff and a larger budget. So think of it this way. If I can show that we're moving in the right direction towards our goals, then I've got a greater chance at folks rallying behind this strategy and understanding that a mighty team of one is not sustainable if we want to reach that goal. The second benefit of evaluation is to set future strategy. Quantitative and qualitative insights give you a clearer understanding of what's working and what's not. And with that information, it's so much easier to identify new opportunities and directions for experimentation. It can spark ideas for what tactics to try or test out next. It also brings into focus which tactics and activities create the strongest mix moving forward. And it can help you make decisions around what to keep, what to adjust, and even what to stop. What activities are not serving your goals? What can you say no to? I know it may feel like a novel idea saying no, but how cool is that? A tool for figuring out what you can take off of your plate. For example, can you stop investing in a thrice weekly set of posts on a particular social media channel, knowing that your key audience prefers to hang out on a totally different platform? Or If sending out a press release on the wire is only getting you pickups in obscure outlets that you've never even heard of, and not the publications that you know your audience pays attention to, then that's an opportunity to stop the wires, rethink your earned media strategy, and reinvest those hundreds of dollars in different communications activities that will actually get you closer to the goal of making meaningful connections with a particular group of people. And that doesn't just apply to community members. What if, instead of spending hundreds of dollars on a wire release, you invest time in a $10 monthly coffee date with local journalists and focus on building relationships with folks who can be your storytelling allies? Through assessments like this, you can also get a better understanding of what it realistically takes to get the results that you want, and whether or not you have enough resources, and really the right resources, both in terms of people power and budget. So we can see how evaluation is good for our organizations and for us as individuals. And in that spirit of looking beyond the individual and going farther together, there's a third benefit to evaluating your communications that's also important to call out, especially in these times, and that's field building. It's all related, right? Telling the story of the impact of our communications and setting future strategy are also connected to our ability as communicators to spread truth, advance causes and issues that are bigger than any single organization, and even share knowledge and resources with each other. So let's take a quick look at each of those. In an era of misinformation and disinformation, the way that we tell the stories of impact about communications and about our organizations more broadly is a means of educating folks and spreading the truth. Yep, I said it's that T word, right? Truth. Embedded in that storytelling is an opportunity to declare in clear and really accurate terms what is happening and why it matters. Thanks to this evaluation work, we're able to situate ourselves in a broader context, and how your organization fits into that ecosystem of a particular sector or issue area. It's a chance to tell the story of our progress towards a goal that entire coalitions share, really, towards milestones for the issue, not just our organization. Now, the Radical Communicators Network recently had a fantastic webinar on measuring narrative change, and I loved how they framed this idea of contribution over credit. So kudos to them and a shout out there. Lastly, when we take a step back and talk to each other about what we're learning, we improve faster, right? Our evaluations contribute to a body of work that strengthens the practice of evaluation and the field of communications. Okay, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Now that we've answered the why question, how do we get started? How do we set ourselves up for success? And what are some constants or best practices that we can rely on? For the next few minutes, I'm going to introduce 4 anchors that will help you lay the foundation for all of your measurement and evaluation. Now, understanding the impact of your communications all starts with defining and understanding what success looks like. That's number 1. At the broadest level, we're talking about what are your organizational goals? Not just what do you want to accomplish as a communicator or within the communications department, but what is the organization as a whole trying to achieve? What's your priority for this next year? Or thinking even longer term, what kind of change are you seeking to affect over time? In many organizations, you'll have access to resources and information that already define this. That could look like an organizational strategic plan, or a logic model, or a rapid response plan. But even in the absence of an up-to-date formal strategy, you can look to your organization's mission, vision, and purpose. Or you can even set up meetings with senior leadership or department heads and have a conversation about what you're trying to do in the short and long term. For the purposes of today's conversation and thinking even more expansively about the role and the value of our communications, it's helpful to pause, I think, and zoom out even more, right? Remember the really big picture, because what success looks like is tied to who you are as an organization. So I've put up some prompts to think about this a little bit more deeply. Why does our organization exist in the first place? What is our purpose? What change are we trying to bring about in the world or in our communities? what values or principles drive our organization's work, culture, and identity. And really, regardless of the specific programs or communications activities, are there any constants when it comes to how we do our work and how we show up for the communities that we serve? For example, do we host quarterly community listening sessions? Do we prioritize working through partnerships, right? The point is that these organizational goals can serve as our North Star. This is what everything points to. Why is this so important? Because this is how we identify and prioritize our communications objectives, strategies, and tactics. And then ultimately, we'll want to connect our measurement and evaluation efforts back to this as well. So that organizational goal might look like a foundation that wants to commemorate its 25th anniversary by launching 2 new grant-making priorities, or perhaps an environmental nonprofit based in Los Angeles wants to support a safe and equitable recovery process for residents impacted by the recent wildfires. Now, a quick sidebar here, having a clear North Star that's bigger than just our communications department is also really helpful for the day-to-day realities of how our work gets done. Communications does not happen in a vacuum. We work with colleagues in every other department. That's one of the things that I love about this role. And not only are they our collaborators and partners in this work, but they are also often our internal clients, if you will, folks who want or need something from us. And so when we can point to a broader goal, a shared goal that is bigger than any one department, we can approach everything from the position of being on the same team. And that helps with conversations around prioritizing requests and even enlisting support in our evaluation activities. Next, be clear about who are your audiences. Prioritize them. Develop personas for them. For many of you, this is already part of your communications planning process. If that's the case, awesome. You are ahead of the game. For those who haven't had an opportunity to reflect on this recently, I invite you to carve out some time to understand who do you need to reach and engage in order to achieve those organizational goals. Another way of framing this besides who do you need to reach could be who can help us achieve this goal? Who's in this with us? Or even where are the levers of power? Who has the ability to make decisions and who is in a position to influence those decision makers? Clearly articulating your audiences now will set you up down the road for being able to assess if your communications efforts are on track and making a difference. Because the assessment is really making a difference among whom, right? Now, if you're a member of the communications network, you're probably familiar with the Pulse polls that they've been conducting periodically. Well, the poll taken in December of last year was really cool for a number of reasons. But one of the results that I was especially excited about was that nearly all survey respondents said that they plan to do some type of communications research in 2025. Awesome, right? But here's the kicker. Only 38% said that research will focus on audiences. So here's a tool that will help. One of the tools that Cause Communications makes available in our resource library is an audience mapping template. Now, the ComNetwork team has already put the link here in the chat, thank you, but this is a worksheet that we don't just share at Cause, we use it too. We found it handy when we're developing a communication strategy or crafting new messaging, but it's also super helpful to our evaluation efforts, especially when it comes to understanding what our current relationship is with each group versus what we would like that to be 6 months or a year from now. Next, you want to identify one or more communications objectives. How can communications contribute to and really accelerate progress towards that broader organizational goal? First, let's consider what's even possible. What can communications achieve and what is measurable? Well, I would say that communications can raise awareness and understanding. It can influence or change attitudes and beliefs, and it can compel people to act, what we would call engagement. So going back to our North Star, in order to achieve our organizational goal, which of these do we need to do? Raise awareness, change attitudes, motivate people to take action. Sometimes for those longer term or loftier goals, we'll actually need to do all three, in which case it's helpful to think of those three A's not just as a list, but as a continuum of outcomes. Now, going back to our audiences for a moment, the more we know about where they currently stand in relation to our organizational goal, the easier it will be to identify what step we need them to take next, or how we want to use the power of communications to move them along that continuum. The last anchor of those four that I want to highlight is about planning and timing. Now, a question that I often hear is, when is the ideal time for the measurement and evaluation process to begin? The answer is now and early. Evaluation is not something to start thinking about at the end of a project or a campaign. What we want to do instead is build monitoring, evaluation, and learning into the entire process. And that starts with building it into the communications planning process. And that is where our trusty communications plan comes in. Now, even though, gosh, the combination of internal requests from other departments, plus a seemingly daily barrage these days of breaking news headlines can make our days feel like one big game of whack-a-mole, I'm still a huge proponent of developing strategy and sitting down to write a communications plan. Now, that plan can be focused on the calendar year or the fiscal year, a specific campaign that you're about to launch, or even a rapid response plan to take back some control against a slew of threats. Now, even if you only do a one-page plan or an outline, that strategy doc is the perfect place to connect your communications activities or tactics to measurement and evaluation. Include a section in your communications plan dedicated to this. I know it sounds obvious, but it's a great way to keep yourself accountable and build in opportunities to be strategic and proactive. So that measurement section of the plan is an opportunity to reflect on the questions that we've already been talking about, right? What does success look like? What information do we need in order to know if we're on track to reach those goals? How will we monitor and measure if we're affecting awareness, attitudes, and actions? Here's an additional tip. There's actually another place in the comms plan that you can sneak in measurement and evaluation, and that is the implementation plan and timeline. Now, in my plans, I love including a chart or a table, something visual with months plotted out, or some sort of date reference so that I can visualize what activities get prioritized when. And within that timeline, you can include when you're going to conduct monitoring and evaluation activities. Consider them learning milestones that you're building in along the way. Super helpful for accountability. And what I love about this too is that you're setting yourself up for continuous learning and agile planning. Let's pause here for a second and go a little deeper into this idea, which also helps us answer that question around when and how often do I measure? So, as with all learning and evaluation, we want to think of measuring the impact of our communications as a cyclical process, not something with a finite start and end date. As you can see from this graphic, we go from strategy-driven planning to monitoring or data collection, and then we figure out what all that data means and use those insights to inform and strengthen our next set of plans. And even with a very specific communications campaign, you can situate that in the broader context of past and future campaigns so that your key learnings from this project can carry over into the next and strengthen that next set of plans. So then to recap, those four principles to anchor your communications evaluation are: one, define what success looks like. Look to your organizational goals as your North Star. Two, be clear about who you want to reach. Three, set communications objectives. And four, map out the approach in your communications plan so you're set up for continuous learning. Now, these are steps that are going to help ensure that the valuable time you dedicate to measurement and evaluation will be worth it, especially knowing that time is such a precious commodity these days. And prioritization and how we're choosing to spend that time feels really, really important in this moment, especially. I would even say that it feels high stakes. The reality is that a lot of people that I'm talking to right now are not focused on Google Analytics dashboards so much as asking questions around, will the communities that we serve be safe next month? So the good news is that these principles that we've been discussing hold up no matter what's going on in the world. I would even argue that laying a strategic foundation for your evaluation practice is more valuable than ever. Your communications activities and tactics may be pivoting to meet the moment, but those same overarching goals and guiding questions will apply even when you're making those shifts. In fact, taking that continuous learning approach can help ensure that you're getting insights in shorter intervals so that you can adapt more quickly. So in this way, your evaluation can help your team be even more agile and effective in that moment. You might even discover that there are opportunities to rethink which metrics are best for helping you tell those stories in the first place. All right, so speaking of rethinking things, we are now going to move beyond those basics and think even more expansively about what it means to be successful with our communications efforts. To do that, it's helpful to bring to the forefront our discussion around, or it's helpful to bring to the forefront some trends and important shifts that we've been seeing in the field more broadly, because again, it's all connected, right? In recent years, we've seen program design come to embrace complexity and prioritize community, with a particular emphasis on ensuring that those who are most proximate to the challenges are involved in the solutions. These shifts are thankfully permeating communications as well, both in terms of how communications are developed and how they're distributed. There's so much more focus now on communications being community centered and even co-designed. And as Sean and Tristan describe in their recent SSIR article, there's been a recalibration happening away from traditional broadcast models towards relationships. The link to that SSIR article that I just referenced is here in the chat, so you can take a closer look. But the point here being that, you know, broadcasting doesn't invite or set us up to receive dialogue and feedback. And there's even a greater expectation now, and I think rightly so, around deep engagement towards a model and a mindset where engagement isn't just clicks, but connections. Now, this is a shift that Jim Canales and Stefan Lamfer at the Barr Foundation are describing as mission-oriented communications. They say, if the center of marketing-oriented communications is the market, the center of mission-oriented communications is relationships and building trust that binds us together. And for the Barr Foundation, that translates to really prioritizing listening. So much so that they're using this to expand how they're defining success in communications. This quote is a snippet from their SSIR article from that same series. They say, our ultimate measure of success for our communications is defined by questions like, did they feel safe? And say that Barr asked questions, listened carefully, and heard them. Whoa, right? Like that's a shift. This is what community centered sounds like. And big picture, what is this a reflection of? The organization's values. Now, when I refer to values, I'm talking about the core principles and beliefs that guide your organization's actions and interactions. Your values define your character as an organization, and they're a key part of your brand identity. Now, I'm curious, how many of you are seeing an increase in the way that your organization's values are taking center stage? Perhaps that's a reflection of some of those broader shifts that we were talking about are permeating your organization as well. How are you seeing your organization's values impact either your internal decision making or even your external storytelling? So I want to pause here and get a sense from the group sort of where things stand with your organization. So in just a minute, we're going to put a poll up that you can respond to, and we'll see where this group is at. All right. Okay. So looking at the results now, I see that um, almost 60% of folks are saying that your organization's values are really driving everything that you do. That's amazing. I love that. Another 40% are saying, kind of, our values are influential, but the connection is implied, not explicit. And then only a teeny tiny margin, only 2 out of the entire group said that your values are currently sitting somewhere off in a silo. So this is really, really great news, and thank you all for sharing. Um, that's really, really heartening to see, and we'll get into this a little bit more in just a moment. And for those of you who are, say, a little bit earlier in your journey of tapping into those values as an asset for your organization, there are lots of great resources out there on how to engage in the process of defining those values for your organization. I'll include some of those resources over on the Com Network Slack after this webinar. It sounds like a lot of you, though, are pretty far along in that process, which is fantastic because once you have those values clearly defined, I want to show you an example of what it could look like to publicly articulate those values. So perhaps you have them defined, but they've been more of an internal resource. Well, this is a snippet from the website of Young Storytellers, which is an amazing nonprofit based in Los Angeles that runs a script to stage storytelling program to amplify the voices of young people. Now, our job as communicators and evaluators does not stop at adding a new page to the About Us section of our website. As we saw with the Bar Foundation, this is not a vanity exercise. These values are central to how we're defining what success looks like. So if our organizational objectives are our North Star, then these values, think of them as the atmosphere around it, permeating everything that we do. And so with that in mind, we can revisit that foundational step of setting your communications objectives. And rather than focus solely on what can communications influence, what if we frame the question differently and ask ourselves, what can communications help us build? Yes, we still want to achieve that legislative victory. That's huge. That's very important. Yes, we want folks to show up to our gala and help us raise lots of money for our cause. Awareness, attitudes, and actions all still have a role to play. But there's also something to be said for prioritizing things like trust, connection, and belonging in our work as communicators. This is a more expansive way, a more expansive view of why do communications in the first place. So going back to that example of a nonprofit that is supporting wildfire recovery efforts, perhaps beyond increasing awareness of local resources and tracking the number of residents who show up at our resource fair, what if we also look at how attendees are exchanging contact information with each other? Or what if we start paying attention to how many organizations who had booths at the resource fair end up collaborating with each other as a result of our organization bringing them together, right? Not just clicks, but connections. So then, how can we apply this community-centered, values-driven lens to our measurement and evaluation practice? The key there is not to stop at treating those values as the ethereal atmosphere floating around our North Star. The key is to use those values as a decision-making tool and a compass, pointing us towards which metrics will be most meaningful to an evaluation practice in which we can assess how we're doing and tell the story of that impact. So let's go back to young storytellers for a moment. They're choosing to track things like the number of volunteer mentors and how many young people have participated in their programs. Awesome. Alongside those descriptions of what happened, what we would call outputs, they're also gathering quantitative and qualitative data around the results of that participation and why that matters. So not just outputs, but what we would call outcomes. They talk about increases in young people's confidence so that they could learn new things, give voice to their creative ideas, and even work with others more easily, even when they disagreed. These outcomes are indicators that directly tie back to the organization's values. Because if that's not belonging, connection, exploration, and play and action, then I don't know what is. Um, Now, I want to highlight two additional places because I always find examples so helpful. There are two more that I want to lift up where you can see how values help us decide which outputs and outcomes are worth monitoring and measuring. Now, this SSIR series that I've mentioned a couple of times includes pieces from the Walton Family Foundation and the Wikimedia Foundation. We're going to put links to both of those articles in the chat. And while those articles are not about evaluation per se, you can still glean some really valuable evaluation lessons from those pieces. And a quick reminder, I know that we're moving through these slides pretty quickly. A recording of the webinar will be available afterwards, and that'll be a great place to, again, grab screenshots, look at quotes a little bit more closely, and look at some of these examples at your own pace as well. In the meantime, we'll try to put as many of these links in the chat so that you can keep the learning going that way too. Now, one example with the Walton Family Foundation, um, and one of the reasons why I loved that article so much is that if your organizational values or priorities include increasing community participation in decision making, as it was for the Walton Family Foundation, then you're going to want to look for and track indicators around access and engagement. Now, for the Wikimedia Foundation, Chief Communications Officer Anusha Alakan recounts how strong media coverage of one of their initiatives led to a partnership with the World Health Organization. So here we've got an example of how outputs, even more traditional ones like media coverage, led to some really cool outcomes, the partnership, which was reflective of the foundation's emphasis on building community. So you can see our values can help us decide which outputs and outcomes are worth monitoring, measuring, and reporting out on. They're a compass for how we set up our evaluation practice. Now, one of the things that I want to acknowledge here is that as we're aligning this work with our values, it's very likely that you'll see a shift in emphasis towards more qualitative data versus quantitative. Now, what do I mean when I say qualitative data? Qualitative data reflect how people think or respond and allow you to explore concepts and experiences in more detail. Examples of qualitative data include how someone felt at an event, the tone of a media article, key messages or themes embedded in an influencer's social media post, or feedback from a grantee. You can gather qualitative data with text analysis, open-ended surveys, one-on-one interviews, focus groups, case study research, participant testimonials, and other first-person narratives. Now, if you have other methods for gathering qualitative insights, since they do tend to be a little bit tricky sometimes, I would love for you to drop those into the chat and share what's working for you. This is also a good reminder that when we think of voices as data, it's critical that we be mindful of whose voices and experiences we are centering. As communicators, there is power and privilege in the decisions that we make about what metrics to track and what data we're using to tell our stories of impact or set future strategy. And so aligning our evaluation with our values includes these ethical considerations. It's really important to be intentional and conscious about these things. And I encourage you to think about where being community-centered can open up opportunities for co-creation and really prioritizing data that is from community and not just data that is about the folks who are impacted by our work. Okay, so in the time that we have left, I want to keep the conversation super practical and continue to lift up ways that we can connect these broader concepts to the work that you are doing every day in your organization. I'm going to share two more examples and then close by highlighting a handful of additional resources that you can use to keep this momentum going. Okay, let's dig into those two final examples. Now, our role is not limited to telling the story of the impact of our communications. It also typically falls to the communications department to tell the story of our organization's impact. And for many of us, that means producing some kind of annual report or impact report, right? Now, I'm seeing some great conversation in the chat about overlap between communications outcomes versus program outcomes. This example of annual reports and impact reports really speaks to that overlap and how we can use these things together to tell a really holistic story about the work and the impact of our organizations. Now, I've noticed over in the Com Network Slack channels on a regular basis, there are conversations where folks are asking for great examples of annual reports or looking for inspiration even around how to get out of the rut of the same old format and the formula that folks may have been following for years when it comes to these kinds of projects. Well, I would say that these reports are an amazing opportunity to showcase this more expansive, values-driven approach that we've been talking about. They're a chance to consider how can we use these reports to make more visible the ways in which our organizational values are brought to life through our work. So let's look at how one nonprofit does this. The nonprofit called Community Partners is a national organization that is based in Los Angeles that supports more equitable, thriving communities through fiscal sponsorship and intermediary services. Now, that just means that they show up as a partner so that organizations and leaders on the front lines can focus on developing new solutions or getting grant money out the door faster to communities. I want to take a moment to point out a few key features from their 2024 impact report that reinforce the concepts that we've been talking about. First of all, more than half of the entire report's real estate is dedicated to partner stories and lifting up the impact that has been achieved through that collaboration. So right off the bat, they're signaling how central partnership is to all of their work, and they're literally creating space for those organizations to be in the spotlight. Now, remember that idea of about versus from when it comes to voices? Well, the report includes a bunch of quotes from those partners. They're describing the work in their own words. It's their voices that are the priority, and it's that more nuanced qualitative data that's taking center stage. Now, for the quantitative stats that are included, because there are quite a few of those as well, we see numbers like how many millions of dollars were reinvested back into community through their intermediary work, or that the application materials in the grant programs that the organization designed were translated into 8 different languages, signaling that access and language justice are important, so that it's not just about that transaction, it's how the work gets designed and done as well. So the metrics being highlighted as indicators of success are also indicators of the organization's objectives and values. It speaks to how they're fostering more equitable, inclusive communities. If you want to check out the full report, the link has already been shared in the chat. So I hope you'll take a couple of minutes afterwards to explore that more fully. And you can also do a search in the Com Network Slack for a bunch of other great examples that can spark new ideas for your report. Okay, let's move on to our last case study. Now, I'm guessing a lot of you are engaged in campaign work right now, or perhaps this type of work is going to increase for your organization in the future. Now, whether it's legislative advocacy or other types of issue-driven work, I want to point to an example from a campaign that embodies this community-centered approach. For those of you who were at the Communications Network annual conference this past fall, this example may be familiar to you because it was spotlighted as part of the Clarence B. Jones Impact Award. And a special shout out and thank you to our friends at the California Endowment for sharing these incredible slides from their keynote presentation so that they can have even more reach by being shared with you all here today. So what you'll see from this next example from the California Endowment is how that approach, that alignment with values, strengthened the campaign strategy over time and influenced decisions about what channels, what messages, and even what methods to try in the service of those broader goals. So, as I mentioned, the California Endowment was recently honored with the Clarence B. Jones Impact Award at the 2024 ComNet Conference. They were recognized for their Health for All campaign, which was grounded in the organization's core belief that healthcare is a human right. Now, the campaign evolved and unfolded over the span of 10 years, and it was driven by the goal of expanding access to healthcare to all, including those who are undocumented. The statewide campaign brought together young, undocumented leaders, immigrant rights advocates, and health advocates. And the campaign itself was motivated by the foundation's values of equity and inclusion. They developed a broad range of communications tactics that were designed to highlight the experiences and the voices of immigrant youth across the entire state of California. Now, some examples. They developed content in partnership with young people, they did message testing, and they evolved their strategy based on what they were hearing and learning from those partners. It was pretty incredible, and it was super inspiring to hear about firsthand. Now, as that campaign implementation carried on, one of the indicators that the communications team watched closely was polling data, which helps them understand that over time, their communications efforts were moving the needle on public support for these more equitable policies. They also looked at outputs related to engagement with their specific communications activities. And they were super intentional about which metrics they were watching at each phase of the campaign. Not all metrics, but those that really help point to understanding, are we being successful? Are we getting closer to that broader goal? Now, legislative and policy changes were some of the biggest outcomes that the California Endowment tracked, but success was not solely defined by achieving that ultimate goal of access for all, which came in 2024 when California enacted a law that expanded access to Medi-Cal to everyone, regardless of immigration status. They also tracked milestones along the way, including incremental but still significant ones towards that North Star. And once they achieved that policy change, they moved into a new phase of the campaign focused on enrollment. And these enrollment numbers really speak for themselves, right? Super impressive. Now, I've been moving through these slides at a breakneck pace, so thank you all for staying with us. And as you can see, it is nearly impossible to distill a 10-year campaign into 2 minutes here. But what jumps out for me about this example is that the foundation really prioritized listening and centered community voices at every stage of the process, including content creation and evaluation. They focused on data and milestones that aligned with their organizational goals, and they used their values as a compass for defining and then going after what success looks like. Now, if you want to go into a deeper dive into this Health for All campaign as a case study, the entire keynote address from the ComNet conference is available. I strongly encourage you to check that out. And in fact, the Communications Network's entire archive of Clarence B. Jones Award winners is a treasure trove of case studies for evaluation. So I would encourage you to check that out to see how your peers are choosing to measure success, and even how the keynote presentations themselves are examples of the ways in which they're choosing to tell that story. And embedded in that storytelling are really great insights about how they used measurement and data to shape the next stages of their comm strategy. So think of this as an entire resource library of phenomenal examples when it comes to evaluation. You can even use these reflection questions that I have here as a kind of study guide. As you continue your evaluation journey, I want to share a few more resources that I want to just call out briefly. I know that we're getting towards the end of our time here together, but a few other spots that I constantly have bookmarked that I want to make sure you can benefit from as well. Um, First up, did you know that there is an international association for the measurement and evaluation of communications? It's a mouthful, but it is very helpful. And for those of you who like plug and play resources, AMEC has an interactive framework and lots of other free tools on their website. So check that out. I mentioned this earlier on in our session, but the Radical Communicators Network hosted a fabulous webinar last fall on measuring narrative change. And that recording is available to everyone as well. So we'll put a link to that here in the chat too. Um, Now, knowing that a lot of the work that we're doing these days is highly collaborative and will depend on coalitions of change makers, the organization Network Impact has some great resources specific to this lens of networked change. So I would encourage you to check them out as well. And then finally, I want to remind folks that the Communications Network has a lot of ways to keep that conversation going. The Slack channel, circles, local groups, and even that new member directory. As I mentioned earlier this afternoon, I'll post links to all of the resources and examples that I've mentioned throughout this webinar in the ComNetwork Slack resources channel, just in case you didn't catch them in the chat as we were going along. All right. Well, I hope that the concepts that we've discussed and the tips that I've shared prove to be valuable as you continue developing your roadmap for measuring and really redefining communications success. We've covered a lot of ground today, so to help us move from sponge mode into action and accountability, I invite you to take a couple of seconds now and set one intention that you will leave with. Grab a piece of paper or open a new tab and write down what is one thing that you can do to begin evolving your approach to evaluation. As you're thinking about that, if you want to share in the chat, you're more than welcome. But remember these three foundational concepts. One, set a strategic foundation. Two, use your values as a compass. And three, don't go it alone. All right, with that, I'll say a big thank you again to all of you, and I will pass it back over to Tristan, who will recap how to join us if you want to keep this conversation going.
Huge round of applause to you, Vanessa. Thank you so much. Thank you, Kelly, as well. Thank you to my colleagues, Kareem, Amy, Carrie, Alyssa, who are all in the chat. So I was remiss in not mentioning at the top of the session that we will record this and post the full recording on the network's YouTube channel. I do see a number of questions here. We are also going to be jumping to office hours in just a couple of minutes. So the link will be in the chat. We'll post it a couple times because there are a lot of thanks pouring in here. So if you do have a question, use this link, give us a couple minutes. You can ask your questions to Vanessa live. Office hours will not be recorded.